Now, we are diving down into the Auckland Climate Action Plan. This happens in two parts, before, now, and more food and drink at lunchtime. First of all, we've got a number of speakers who are going to set some particular context, make some particular contributions to this, and then we're going to have a panel discussion about it. So first up, it's my great pleasure to welcome John Morrow, who's Chief Sustainability Officer for Auckland Council, who's going to give us the overview of the plan. So a very warm welcome for John, please. Thanks very much.
Kia ora koutou. Salam. Ko John Morrow taku Angola. Ko toko toronga he Chief Sustainability Officer te Tamaki Makoto. Aho. And look, my job here, besides corralling you in from a nice treat and some good coffee, is to just give you some context on Auckland's Climate Action Plan. That's not the only reason why we're gathered here, but I think that's our key focus over the next few days, day one being today. So I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of where we're at and where we're going. So as you know, and has been said very well by other speakers, climate change is a tremendous risk and perhaps opportunity to our communities, to our city, and in fact to our civilization. And so what we need, and what councillors and the mayor have given us the direction to do, is to pull together a plan, an action plan with an emphasis on the action, on what dramatically reducing emissions looks like, and dramatically increasing resilience looks like at the same time. So to me, there's a set of principles here. What we're trying to do is develop an action plan with everybody that's integrated, that's innovative, that's inclusive, and that's intergenerational. That's why we're here, and that's actually the focus of my team's work and the work of the broader council family. But let's be honest, as Abby has said and others will say, this isn't council's plan to deliver, this isn't our plan to even create, and that's what's so joyous about having you here in this room with us today. So that's the Auckland Climate Action Plan really briefly, at least the goals and the aims. I'll unveil it just a little bit over time here, but just a little bit about how we got here, because I think as this symposium is trying to illustrate the classic go into a bunker, write a plan, and come out and see if the community likes it, it just doesn't work. And it's not that effective. And we've learned that over the past probably almost a year now, that we've been doing the work on Auckland's Climate Action Plan. As you know, Auckland Council and Auckland together is committed to a climate-ready future. But the temperature is heating up. It's really, it's a different state of affairs now than we were even just a few years ago. And so I think what we need to do, and what we're planning on doing with this approach, which you are all guinea pigs in the room to help us with, is to really pivot and innovate and do something new and different. Now, it might be a little bit unusual to hear a bureaucrat talk about new and different, so I'll own that one. That maybe, we only get so far. But the intent here, through new business models, through new digital democracy platforms, new partnerships, new approaches with Mana Whenua, new approaches with the private sector, new approaches in our organization itself, is that we will get somewhere different. So that's the intent, and actually what has landed us here today. So we've talked probably to almost every single one of you. We've talked to hundreds and hundreds at our subject matter expert workshops. We've been to all 170 elected officials more than once. And they're actively part of this plan, some more than others. Those in the room here, I commend you and recognize you for your leadership in this space. So today is really pivotal. Actually, today is a day that we're starting to pull the bits together. And we're starting to actually expose our focus here of what we're trying to do, and actually how real climate change is for Auckland and Aucklanders. If you didn't need that memo, I think that's probably why some of you are here in the room. So a little bit about what is next. Today is, like I said, quite a pivotal day for us in the creation of a collective plan that we collectively deliver. And so just to kind of peer back the curtain a tiny bit, we currently have about 10 focus areas that were, 10's a big number. We have probably 50 actions that are currently part of the plan as we envision it, and it's quite rough. Right now is the time we start to engage you. And how we're doing this over the next couple of days is actually to engage around 5 flagship actions. And as Kevin Austin actually recited all of them, how did he know from C40? We're talking about things like establishing a climate innovation system, like decentralized renewable electricity and energy for Auckland, for green and blue networks and a place like Monaco. We're looking at things like circularizing the construction and demolition sector for Auckland. And we're also looking at how we reduce emissions and build resilience as part of the city center master plan. Those are 5 flagship actions which some of you have already given some of your lives to, so thank you. And some of you are about to over the course of the next couple of days, so thank you in advance. And we're gonna leverage those 5 flagships as a way to tell the story about climate action in Auckland. Those aren't the end-all be-all. Those aren't the only things we're doing. In fact, they're probably not the most material things we need to do around climate change of themselves. But they illustrate that we need to work together on this. They illustrate that we need to work quickly on this. And they illustrate what we can do at a sizable scale, but that we could actually scale up across the rest of the city. So that's what we're focused on over the next couple of days, including today. From here, it'll actually go to Councillor Hulse's committee. They will be agreeing a draft for consultation to the public. It's my hope and desire that every single one of you not only has your say, but actually gets the word out and talks to your constituents, talks to the people in your communities, your neighbors, your family, and whānau about what this really means for Auckland. It's a really pivotal decision around our blueprint for climate change, not just for council, as a cross-sector group of citizens, of businesses, of iwi, of people wanting to make this really happen on the ground. So that's why we're here. That's where we're going. There's a lot unknown, but we really respect your involvement in the ambiguity and what could be, and I think that's what we're here to design today. There's quite a bit to do, so let's get to it. I do want to thank all of you for your engagement thus far, of course, your engagement in the future, to really build an inclusive and a great climate-ready city in Auckland, and one that is built on the real principles of peace and connectedness that we can talk about today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, John, for telling us more about where the Climate Action Plan fits and where it's going and your hopes for it. Our second speaker, and once we've had each of these speakers, they will then be back here in the panel discussion, so there'll be lots of chance to be interactive with them in due course. Our second speaker is Nairumu Blair of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, and Narimu's here as co-chair of the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum, which brings together the iwi of Tamaki Makaurau area. And so I'd like to welcome up Nairumu next, please. A very warm hand for Nairumu, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Tēnā koutou. Kei te tautoko au ngā mihi me ngā inoi, ko inoitia I mua I tēnei tūnga, I te ata nei kei te tautoko. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name is Nairumu Blair. I am Ngāti Whātua, however, I am here today to represent the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum. I am the co-chair along with Patience Te Ao. She is from Waikato Tainui. And there are 19 iwi represented on the forum who are elected representatives of the various iwi from our northeast right down to Hauraki in the mouth of the Waikato River. In preparing for today, in the 10 minutes I have allocated, I did have a presentation, but I'm going to actually leave that for now. And because I think us cynics from Generation X who have inherited the earth as it is from our parents, from the baby boomers, who lived through the boom time of post-World War II economic growth, what is it for us to say? I don't think a lot, and therefore I wanted to hand over to our rangatahi, who don't often get platforms like this to speak to civic leaders, to city leaders, to business leaders. And so with the 8.5 minutes I have left allocated, I would like to invite some of our rangatahi who are here today. Unfortunately, most of them could not march on Friday at the Climate Change March because they were at the front line at Polyfest, the largest Polynesian festival in the world, separating rubbish with an 80% diversion rate for the first time ever that has ever been attempted. And so we have rangatahi here, our young ones from the Parekura movement, but also who are out there actively trying to protect our environment, papatua nuku. And so, yeah, haramai ki te kōrero.
Me ino e tātou. Mānawa tākina, mānawa mai a te rangi runga nei, mānawa mai a te papairaro nei, mānawa mai ngā makuru kuringa ki ei nei taura, kuringa ki ei nei tauira. Kaupare hi atu ngā haukingo te wā, whānau te aureka ki roto. Kia tau te ai o nuku, kia tau te ai o rangi, whānau te aureka ki roto. Ia i te ora, whiti whiti ia i te ora. Ka ea ki runga, ka ea ki raro. Nau mai ngā ua te rā, uhia mai rā te hao te ora. Ka whakamaua kia tīna. Tīna. Hui e. Tai ki.
We are the Kaitiaki Mana Rangatahi. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Take yourself to a place you feel most connected to. Can you feel the wind of Hawhiri Mātea on your face? Can you hear the waves of Hine Moana? Do you feel the vibration of the ngahere? Will your children, will your mokopuna feel this too? Do they deserve the future we are giving them? Now, open your eyes. Our whakaaro, our way of living, is in a time of darkness. Te ahuru mō wai. We are here to help navigate through that darkness. Be tāne mahuta and push the darkness away. We are teina to the taiao. We are the younger, the learners to the environment. Kanoho teina te tangata, kanoho tuakana ko te taiao.
In days past, we listened to the trees. We noticed tohu, signs, and we respected those messages because we are te taiao. We are the environment. We cannot continue talking about te taiao. Rather, we talk with te taiao because we are one. As rangatahi, we are teina to you. You have knowledge and lived experiences that we will never know. But you are also teina to us because you don't know what it is like to live as rangatahi right now. We are here and we are suffering the effects of a system that does not value the voice of future generations and te taiao.
Our mātauranga tells us of Maui Pōtaki, the youngest hautotu, the trickster. He was bold, creative with change, he was innovative, he was experimental, and he got on with it. At the end of April, those traits will guide us as we bring together 100 rangatahi voices to write our rangatahi action plan, which will sit beside the Auckland Climate Change Action Plan. As Indigenous rangatahi voices, we know where we stand. We ask you to trust, tautoko, and awhi us in the healing of our whenua on behalf of our mokopuna. We ask you to recognise us in the future and the plan for our future. We are Generation Now. Our voices will be heard. Whakarongo pikari. Manaaki whenua, manaaki tangata, manaere whakamaua. Care for the land, care for the people, and go forward. Tuturu whakamaua kia tina. Tina. Kuie. Tai kire.
Okay, that was way better than my presentation. So, kāre he kōrero tū atu ki tēnā. I'll leave it there and look forward to the discussion on the panel. Tēnā koutou.
Thank you hugely for your contribution there. And it was absolutely fabulous that you were at Polyfest on Friday, and I'm sorry you missed a great time stopping all the traffic on Queen Street. But your very practical response on Friday was tremendous on those climate change issues. And thank you for coming together to create that rangatahi action plan to be very much a part of the Auckland one. So thank you very much indeed. Now, our third speaker up, it's Joan Coe, who's an Associate of Environment and Resources Specialist at Arup, the great global engineering and architecture firm. And Joan's talking about the journey to net zero. This is some modelling that Arup's done on emissions and in Auckland, and gaining some insight into that work from Arup's great global knowledge. A very warm welcome for Joan, please. Thank you very much indeed.
So I do represent a global team that's been working with Auckland Council on this. There are people in the UK, Australia and New Zealand that have been working on the modelling that I'm going to show you today. So I'd like to talk a little bit about modelling first. I find that the very best climate action plans are ones with leadership, enthusiasm, inspiration and a real commitment to change, backed up by evidence and data and science. That evidence-based policy making that we aspire to doesn't always happen, but in this case, it's a really good foundation for the climate action plan that Auckland's going to produce in the coming months. And just to illustrate, I want to talk a little bit about Melbourne, which is my hometown. In 2008, we did pretty much a global first citywide zero net emissions model from that. It illustrated a pathway, a combination of levers, tools, mechanisms that council could use to get to net zero emissions. We came up with lots of different ideas. The one that the mayor zoomed in on was a flagship action called the 1200 Buildings Program. And that program aimed to retrofit 2/3 of all the commercial buildings in Melbourne. And in doing so, generate $2 billion of private investment and 8,000 jobs. Now, setting that clearly in sight, based on evidence, what happened after that was lots of innovation, particularly finance innovation, so dealing with the legal, administrative, and financial barriers to major commercial retrofit. But that was the carrot, and then alongside it, a whole bunch of sticks as well, including changing our building code to make it really probably quantifying sustainability benchmarks in our planning system, which was a first for Australia, and we're pushing the envelope again for another round of updates to that building code at the moment. So in 2008, more than 10 years ago, we were able to focus on one flagship action. Auckland doesn't have the luxury of just one, you've got 5, because that's the pace that we have to head down now to get to net zero very quickly. So that evidence-based scientific approach to modelling is pretty much enshrined in this document that C40 produced with Arup. It's called Deadline 2020, and it's called 2020 because it was produced in 2017. And the report says we've really got 4 years to really change the trajectory that we're on. 2020 is uncomfortably close at the moment. Deadline 2020 sets out for all the cities under C40, including Auckland, what it would take to get 1.5 degrees Celsius and underneath that safety threshold. We found that of all the emissions reductions that we need to do as a globe, 40% of those reductions have to happen in our cities. So the cities do have substantial influence, control, but also responsibility. And just for the people who like the numbers, the pointy heads in the room that Penny mentioned earlier, all the C40 cities have a carbon budget. 2030, we need to get to 2.9 tonnes of carbon per person living in those cities. To give you a feel, Auckland's at 6.4 at the moment, so that's halving, a bit more than halving our budget. Now, 2030 is not that far away. I've got a kid that's just started prep. She's going to be in year 12 by the time that happens. It's in our lifetime, very clearly. So why modelling? It's because there are lots of levers to pull. Now, which levers to pull, by how much, when, which goes first, which goes second. There's so much complexity, and luckily for us, modelling can simplify the complexity. So what I'd like to do is show you some graphs and build them up slowly so that when you see the whole graph, you'll understand some of the bits that lay underneath it. But just a little bit of also a comment. As a nation, New Zealand is coming up with its own climate action plan, and that will be enshrined in legislation. Auckland is a particular snapshot of New Zealand, a different one compared to national scale. So some of the differences between Auckland and the nation is the emission sources. The top 3 emission sources in Auckland region are buildings, transport, and significantly industry as well. So even though as a nation, agriculture is very significant, in Auckland region, we need to focus a lot on industry. Other things that we should note, there are quite a lot of fossil fuels, depending on the time of year, time of day, in North Island compared to the whole of the nation. We've got lots of population growth here, which also implies a tremendous opportunity for public transport and active transport to be built into the bones of the city. And I'd also like to say a lot of the flagship and headline major events have proved around the world to be catalysts, big moments of change that you can grab onto. And there are plenty of amazing events in Auckland that we can use to push action as well as people's hearts and minds. Okay, so the graphs. We took today's emissions for Auckland and we pushed it out, assuming we did nothing more and just motored along to 2050. So the graph shows on the left today, or 2016, and on the far right, 2050. And then population growth, economic growth drives that trend up. So it should be obvious, under business as usual, emissions go up. A lot of it driven by population growth. So what I'm going to do now is build up some wedges and some actions that will slowly take us down to a low carbon future. The first wedge I've highlighted, the pink ones, are energy use in buildings. And to get rid of those emissions that I've shown here, the kinds of actions you need to do are zero carbon buildings for new buildings by 2050, major retrofit of all the existing stock, at least half of the buildings to be retrofitted, and about 50% uptake of solar power on those buildings. Whew, they're gone. We've all done that. Those emissions are gone. The next wedge we're going to tackle is the energy used in industrial buildings. And the kinds of measures here are things like getting them off gas and getting heat pumps in and connecting different industrial parks together so they share heating and cooling. And this is a major wedge here. Transport. To get that wedge away, we've assumed that by 2050, 80% of vehicles are electric, and that we've tripled the amount of public transport mode share there is in Auckland. That's a substantial move from today. And that implies all kinds of infrastructure investment, but most importantly, planning. Then there's a little bit of waste here. Don't be disheartened by this. Dealing with the waste problem solves a lot more problems aside from greenhouse gas emissions. But this wedge comes from assuming we halve the amount of waste we generate by 2050, and we also double the amount of recycling that we do. And then industrial process emissions. So this is not running the buildings, but all the processes that we use to manufacture and create things. And that's about recovering waste heat and other innovative biochar and other sustainable fuel sources. And the last little wedge, we've been relatively conservative about sequestration. This is about building out all the ecological corridors that have been planned in the last couple of years. That's about 20,000 new trees. We know that federally, as a national government, there's a major focus and investment in planting trees, and we have the opportunity to increase this amount. And to be honest, we're going to have to invest in sequestration, because you'll see we haven't got to zero yet by 2050. A lot of the remaining emissions are industrial emissions, so the industry that exists in our region today and what we can do about them. It may be that we can't do much more, and that the heavy lifting will have to be done by our blue and green networks. And so that's the whole pathway that we've illustratively modelled. We gave that information to all the subject matter expert workshops. It's food for thought for people to try different things, poke and prod, and just understand the scale of action that's required. And you will see graphs like this, okay? Complicated graphs, but now you know where they come from. You're all graph literate now. So having done that modelling, I'd like to give you a few thoughts about where the material effort needs to be done, where the hard work needs to happen. We need to look at ambitious public transport uptake and all the measures that build up to that mode share in the end. Thinking about what industry exists in our region, Auckland, and understand the nature and the shape and the performance of that industry to come. The high performance buildings, you'll be building lots of new buildings for residents and for economic growth now. How do we make sure that they're fit for purpose? They have future value beyond today's value. Community scale retrofit. I think that's incredibly hard. We've got millions of own actors, people who own their own assets. How do you coordinate action across lots of actors? And the last one is that sequestration, that missing piece. That's the end of mine.
Thank you very much indeed, Joan. Those are quite formidable challenges. There's no two ways about that. And thank you for laying that out, though, and we'll have a great discussion about that in due course. Our last speaker this morning is Kira Sherwood O'Regan, Ngāi Tahu descent, who's Executive Board Member of Ora Taiao, New Zealand Climate and Health Council. Kira's a young person early in her career, but already hugely involved in all of these issues. For example, being part of New Zealand's youth delegation to COPs 23 and 24. So a very warm welcome to Kira, please. I'm scanning the room for... there she is. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. All yours.
Okay, kia ora koutou. Ko Aoraki te Mauka, ko Waitaki te Awa, ko Tahupōta ki te Tupuna, ko Kātiraki Amo, kai te rua hiki hiki ka hapu. Ko te reo aroha, ko uenoku ka marae, ko Kira Sherwood O'Regan aho. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora koutou. My name is Kira Sherwood O'Regan, and I hail from the most beautiful island on earth, Te Waipounamu. I also grew up, I guess, in the shadow of our Moka Ariki, Aoraki, and I also whakapapa to the southernmost tip of our beautiful Motu down south, the beautiful Blustery Bluff. But like so many other people, and no doubt many other people in this room, my parents decided that it was the right decision for our whānau to trek north and to come to this intersection of two oceans in Tamaki Makaurau. So I therefore really want to acknowledge the tangata whenua of this special place who have welcomed us, as well as many other mātāwaka to Tamaki, and who have generously permitted me another place to call home. On the note of home, on the note of home, I also want to acknowledge those in my tribal takiwā who had a right to be safe, but who have lost their lives due to white supremacy. And I want to acknowledge that this weekend has been very sleepless and very heavy for many in this country, and indeed in this room. So I apologise. Actually, no, I'm not going to apologise. I own that I'm affected by that. Places. So I just want to say that I am quite nervous speaking today in front of you, and so I apologise for my reliance on my notes, which have changed rather last minute. But I guess this brings me back to how I started this kōrero, that as Māori, we often introduce ourselves in a particular way, with pepeha. It's a way that we acknowledge our whakapapa, and it's a way of making connection, which is something I dare say that we need more than ever right now, and something that has already been alluded to by many of the people who I'm sharing the stage with, including our incredible rangatahi over here, who I've also had the privilege of working with, the absolute immense privilege of working with. So in sharing my pepeha, ko Aoraki te mauka, I share that Aoraki is my mountain, that Waitaki is my river, that Tahu Pōtaki is my tupuna, my ancestor. And for me, and for many of us as Māori, our pepeha is crucial in forming those connections with, kia ora, with others that we meet in whatever circumstances. You know, we use our pepeha to make connections and, remind us that we all share whakapapa in some way, no matter how far back we do have to go and no matter how different we might seem at the surface, we all have some shared whakapapa. We also share our pepeha in forming connections and reminding us of connections with our environment and with our taiao, and to remind us that we're not separate from it. We can't really be separate from it when it's our ancestor, right? So Aoraki is my mountain, and my mountain is melting. I'm very, very privileged, as I mentioned, that in my work I get to connect with many amazing rangatahi, many amazing people, but especially rangatahi. And myself, I'm probably a little bit too far on the rangatahi adjacent side, so I won't pretend to speak for them. But I will share some of the gems that they have really, that I've been privileged that they've shared with me recently. And I think that's kind of come through in the kōrero that they've already shared. They have highlighted that many rangatahi Māori conceptualise climate change and the environment in a way that is vastly different from some of the mainstream stories and narratives that we hear about climate change. They speak about relating to the environment through whakapapa. You know, they relate to our moka, our awa, our moana, our whenua through that whakapapa and through the atua. You know, rather than thinking of these mountains, rivers, waters as, through a lens of ownership or the idea of them being resources, and I feel that this is a much less extractive thinking that is going to be really crucial in addressing climate change and addressing it equitably for everyone. They also really highlight that climate change is inextricably linked with the well-being and with the health of our people. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone has to adopt an Indigenous worldview, but the point of sharing this, I think, is that we really need to examine where we are, and we need to drastically change the way that we think about, the way that we relate to, and the way that we connect with our climate and our environment, and indeed to each other. I want to acknowledge that these are also many of the ideas that are being shared by tamariki and rangatahi who globally committed to striking against climate and against a climate unsafe future on Friday. And they were striking for a future and for the well-being of all of us. Myself, I have been a climate activist since I was about this tall, so I can relate to those strikers. I started my first, climate-related campaign when I was about 16, and I've been involved, as Rod mentioned, in about 3 rounds of UN negotiations on climate change, physically present at the last 2. And I really want to challenge some people, or challenge all of us. Someone tell me what has really changed. As a medical student and an aspiring health professional, I put a lot of great faith in the science. I think the science is hugely important, but I don't think that the underlying message it has been telling us has drastically changed in those years since I was this high. I think, if anything, the message has just gotten more urgent. The really famous and recognised Lancet refers to climate change as the biggest threat to human health in the 21st century. And the IPCC report, which we're no doubt all aware of, paints a pretty bleak future for our collective well-being, and especially for the well-being of the most structurally oppressed groups, those who are most at risk if we do not take drastic action now. And so I want to go to that challenge and say, how do we tackle the biggest threat to our collective well-being, and especially that well-being of those most structurally oppressed people? How do we tackle that biggest threat by tinkering around the edges? My view, and I know a view that many rangatahi have shared with me, is that we simply can't. So the science is clear. We don't need to wait for more science, and we don't need to wait for more permission to take action, and we don't have to wait for the ocean to rise up and be on our own individual doorsteps before we take responsibility for the future that we are creating for our rangatahi and our tamariki, and for the present that we have already created for many people through our inaction. I think that we have to fundamentally rethink the way that we greet our climate, and it starts with that connection that has been mentioned so many times already this morning. We can't just think about these things separately, with transport over here and fossil fuel divestment over here, agriculture over here, and by the way, a nice wee pocket for Indigenous peoples, people with disabilities and other structurally oppressed groups, some way over in a really small space in the corner of the UN. I think that we need to really build, and we really need to weave connection and belonging into the fabric of our cities. And, I think we need to face up to what we're going to have to tell each other and tell our future generations. How can we say that we have taken action on climate change when through our inaction, we're essentially telling some people that they don't belong and that we don't care, because we're failing to step up far enough and fast enough to protect them? I think that addressing climate change doesn't just need to happen for those of us who are privileged enough to be in this room, and I want to own the privilege that I am here with. I have a huge amount of it, and I know that it protects me as it protects many of us in this room from the full effects of climate change. So I think addressing climate change, really truly addressing it, means that we need to do it fast enough, and we need to go far enough so that Indigenous peoples
people with disabilities, people of colour, women and gender diverse people, people who are the most structurally oppressed and the most affected by climate change are genuinely protected. This to me really connects up with that view that we are all, as I say, interconnected, and we haven't solved climate change unless we've solved it for everyone, and unless everyone's rights have been advanced in that process. And I think when we take this view, we therefore see that climate change and climate action is, as many rangatahi have mentioned, intrinsically linked with that well-being. And one of the many things that I cherish from learning at medical school, from Matua Rhys-Jones, who's probably in the crowd somewhere here, Paparangi Reid and other incredible Māori academics and researchers and health professionals, is that there are many Māori conceptualizations and models of health, and I think they have a lot to offer us in teaching us about health, the interconnectedness of this health, and how it interconnects with our climate. If we want our communities to be healthy, we have to tackle everything. I think of Sir Mason Jury's Te Whare Tapa Whā, and how it identifies your taha tinana, your body, your mind, also your whānau, your wairua, and your spiritual health. And I think about how that whare, that house, is situated within an environment. And I think that we need to be really careful that we're upholding all of those walls, all of those taha of the whare as we go forward in trying to improve our own health, and we need to recognise that that is situated in and affected by the environment that that whare is built in. And so when I think about this model, it reminds me that there are some very direct effects of climate change, again, ones that are going to affect the most structurally oppressed groups the most. So with the changing climate, we're bound to have changing distribution of infectious diseases. When we look at the distribution of pathogens themselves, also vectors like mosquitoes or things like this is all changing. Even noticing over the summer the heat waves and how they have affected the elderly and others who have been at risk. But there are also some really significant indirect effects. And I think to recognise that, we need to recognise that, you know, climate and climate action and health, none of this exists in this bubble. You know, to be healthy depends on our financial resources, our social connections, our education level, the time that we have to invest in our health. If we can go home and if we have time to cook a healthy meal, and if we even live in an area where that food is healthy and affordable and accessible. And, you know, whether we live in an area where it's safe enough to go for a run in the morning or in the afternoon or wherever and whenever you please. I think that climate change is an inequity magnifier, and if it affects those who are already structurally oppressed the most. In case you haven't guessed, that's the thing that I want everyone to take away from this, is structurally oppressed groups. This is not accidental. It is not by chance. These are structurally oppressed groups, and they are affected the most. And so those indirect effects affect those people the most. Whether it's food shortages, availability of fresh water, and also now for my generation and many of the rangatahi and tamariki that I speak to, we're now facing the trauma of climate change. And, you know, Indigenous communities are having to really examine our culture and our beliefs and how we can integrate that with a changing climate when we're having to relocate our marae, when my maunga is melting, when, you know, people are having to be concerned about sea level rise affecting the burials of their dead. So I really don't want to be all doom and gloom, but I really want to drive that point home about structurally oppressed peoples. And so I think there's a lot to think about in this interconnectedness of how climate change affects all of us, but affects some people more than others. And in that interconnectedness, I think there's also a bit of beauty, because that is where we have so much opportunity to do so much good. We have an opportunity to really design the future of our world and our cities and our communities, and to, like I said, build that connection into the fabric of our communities. We're creating our future every day, and we have the opportunity to embed that with our values and beliefs, with every single action that we take and every action that comes out of this plan, and all of the mahi, all the work that all of you in this room are doing. Unfortunately, many of those actions we can take also instill benefits for other areas of our lives, highlighting again how everything is interconnected, from the health benefits of active transport and going for a walk or a bike ride or catching public transport, improving our cardiovascular health, to healthier, more plant-based diets that reduce emissions. Plus, as one rangatahi I was talking to shared, they had this wonderful opportunity to build a community garden and to get outside in the garden and share seeds with neighbours and people across the city, and to build that garden and reap the benefits of a thriving social network IRL, so in real life. That's got to have some pretty amazing benefits for our health and for our mental well-being and for bringing us all together. Same with home insulation and making our homes more energy efficient. How much more welcoming are they going to be for our tamariki? How much more welcoming are they going to be for us to be able to have those cup of tea and connect with each other? How much better are they going to be to have friends over for dinner or to host people when they're in need? So I think I've gone on long enough, and I could go on and on and on about all of the opportunities that this also presents us. But I don't think I need to, because the rangatahi have already shared an amazing vision. I don't really need to convince you that we need to take this drastic action, because we listen to them share how it feels to have tāwhiri mātea on our cheeks, how it feels to be grounded on Papa Tuanuku and to be holding her and having her under our feet. So I don't think I need to convince you that that is something we should all be striving for. But I think what we do need to ask ourselves is how much we are willing to strip back, how much we are willing to really work for that vision and really work for that future, because cutting it around the edges, even some of our most ambitious plans, are not going to get us where we need to be for everyone. So I just really encourage everyone to listen to the voices of those rangatahi and those tamariki who are saying that this is not enough, and that we really, really need to be doing better. So kia ora koutou.
Kara, thank you hugely for giving us such a powerful integrated view and the enormous challenge of creating a very healthy place as a city, and therefore the measure of that being the well-being of its people, and absolutely emphasizing that we can't just kind of clean up a bit what we're doing. This is about very radical change and a speed of change, a scale of change and a complexity of change we haven't come within cooey of before. So thank you for that. I'd like to welcome our 4 speakers back up here, because we're now going to get into the panel bit. Why don't you just get up and have a quick stretch while they're having a quick stretch, because we've been going for about 45 minutes then. That's good. By all means, say hello to the person next to you as well. Oh, that's loud. I'm just going to talk to myself because after a while people think, oh, something interesting is going on, and they kind of listen. Oh, what's going on? I'm basically talking complete nonsense here until the room quietens down. It works wonderfully. I could just put my hand up, but somebody's enjoying it. It works every time. You think I'm saying something interesting and I'm not. I was just rabbiting on. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Quite honestly, given how long it takes us to organize the 7 people sitting up here, I don't think we have any chance of doing anything meaningful about 2020. No, sorry. No, it's just great. The social interaction is really important. Now, very importantly, Naurimu has brought up 2 of the wonderful rangatahi earlier, and they're just going to introduce themselves so we know who's who. There you go for it. Thanks.
Oh, hello. Oh,
Thanks.
Kia ora te whānau, ko Tainui te waka, ko Parongi e te maunga, ko Mangapu te awa, ko Ngāti Poto me Ngāti Porou iwi, ko Rere Amanu me te kaua ngā marae, ko Kohanga te urupa, ko Pēni na kahau mikono tuku ingoa. Kia ora whānau, my name is Pia. I am one of the Rangatahi Environmental Youth Leaders for Parakoriki Tamaki. Yeah, it's nice to be here. Kia ora.
Hello. Oh, kia ora. Tēnā rā tātou katoa, ko whakarongoro a tōku maunga, ko utukura tōku awa. Ko mata haurua tōku waka, ko mokono i arangi tōku whare tupuna, ko ngāpui te iwi, ko te ngahinga he te hapu. Kia ora everybody, my name is Waiatarame Katupe. I am another rangatahi youth leader for Parakoriki Tamaki. It is amazing to be here, and kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Naurimu, can I just give you the opportunity for you to give us those themes that have come through from the forum of a deep sustainability nature, and we start with that first. Thank you.
Sure.
Do you want actually your slides?
No, it's okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm from Ngāti Whātua, and quite apt I'm sitting in between Ngāpuhi and Waikato. That's kind of how it is. So yeah, as the chair of the forum, the forum is committed to te taiao and our environment. We have developed a position paper as really much a starting position for us on the issue, and trying to find ways that firstly as iwi we can collaborate and have these kōrero, and then to guide us in our 19 different entities and institutions about how we might reshape and rethink about how we do things, from the investments we make to the types of education programs that we try to invest in as hapu and iwi. We are also, like we've heard today, very much guided by our whakapapa, by the taonga that have been handed down by the gods to our ancestors and to us. And at 1840, we, after 5,000 years of perfecting the art and the science of kaitiakitanga through the South Pacific, and then 1,000 years here in Tamaki, and making a lot of mistakes along the way, we did. However, by at 1840, really having developed a system that respected the waitamata, the manukau, the kaipara, te wānui a tiriwa, our forests and our awa, and then having that massively disrupted. And so 180 years later, having welcomed the new people to our land, and then having places like this created. You can see behind the old landfills that were established to dump rubbish in the waitamata, to make money, to then cap and turn into reclaimed land, which could be easily sold by our Auckland Harbour Board. They figured out you could make much more money reclaiming and selling land than running a port operation. Anyway, that's for another day. So the forum is really coming to grips with this issue, but it also is to remind ourselves and the city that we have been doing things, we're still doing things, and will continue to do things to try to protect our sacred sites, our awa, and our harbours and our ngahere. So
across the spectrum, all the tribes, I mean, great leadership from Te Kawara Wāmaki around the Rahui to protect our kauri, and some of the vitriol that they experienced online, in person, and all the I live out west, so the signs were getting knocked over every other day, and people abused who were trying to stop people going into the ngahere. Thankfully the council came on, a little bit late guys, but hey, you're on there now. Still a lot of work to do, but lots of great leadership by the different tribes. Ngāti Pāwa, who will be leading out on a predator-free Waiheke Island. My own tribe, who have done sustainable, I call it Brown Star rated housing up in our village. It's just a start, yeah, so lots of the tribes have been doing work despite all of the barriers over the generations, and are very committed to partner with whomever in the room to scale up all of the different kaitiaki projects that we have.
Fine, thank you. And thank you for that overview. And Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum is very much an integral part of this Auckland Council Action Plan. You're feeding very directly into the plan, are you?
Yeah, we are. And I'd say it's not easy. So we're trying to weave a world view that we have with those of our city leadership and bureaucracy. And it is a challenge. It is really hard. Sometimes you just want to go, oh, stuff it, let's just do our own thing. However, you know, this is a journey that we all need to be on together. I think no one can deal with the task in front of us with only one worldview, or our way or your way. And the reality is we all have to swallow some pride and mana and find ways that we can share all of our different knowledges for the ultimate reason, which is for our very existence.
Fine, thank you. On that note, I just think it's amazingly exciting to see how these views are coming together, and I'm seeing it particularly in the national science challenges like our Land and Water and Biological Heritage one, and others, where Matarangi Māori and sort of Western science are understanding the complementarity, the connection, the way to work together. And I'm seeing it dramatically changing the whole perspective and the whole schedule. So, and all the plans, all the work. And so for that to infuse that bringing together of those views, to infuse what we're up to in Tamaki Makaurau, I think is immensely powerful. So thank you for that. What we're going to do is I'm just going to ask one or two particular questions here before opening this up to all of you, because we've got until 12:28, very precisely my notes tell me, before I have to introduce our next speaker. So be prepared, please, for lots of questions. The first one I'm going to do is to come to Joan, and those wedges are... wedges, they sound so good. Those wedges of great chunks of emissions we can take out. The very obvious point you were making there is that the transport one's very big, and residential energy use and industrial energy use, and indeed the opportunity for sequestration and the like, are also surprisingly thin. Now, some people would say, well, let's just concentrate on transport because that would knock the issue substantially on the head. But of course, it's about the integration between the two, isn't it? So can you just kind of make some of those connections between residential and industrial issues and how they in themselves contribute to making progress on transport? So therefore, there's this huge necessity to work on all of those interrelated issues because of all the co-benefits, because that's the only way we're actually going to pull this off.
That's a big question.
Yes.
Well, the first thing to say is that we can't ignore any of the wedges. So it might look simple just to tackle transport, but that will leave you to where Australia is at the moment, where we've spent the very little willpower we've got on renewable energy, and we're making great strides in renewable energy, and we've done nothing with transport. and that's really letting us down in terms of our targets. Buildings and transport are related to each other in lots of different ways. The most obvious one is in planning. If you put people in the right places near their jobs and near transport networks, then you can make very efficient use of carbon and get people healthy as well. There are other more emerging ways that they're related. So, if, for example, in Asia, it's very likely that electric vehicles will become a battery storage as well for our buildings as they generate electricity. Now, it's completely different in Australia. We've got so much land and hydro elevation differences that will probably have storage in the grid in a completely different way, and we might move to hydrogen vehicles there. So those sorts of questions are very dependent on the context. In Auckland, I think that electric vehicles are a very realistic prospect here to complement the rich renewable electricity sources. And as you do your buildings and transport networks, the way they talk to each other in an infrastructure sense, in a planning sense, and a people's lives sense will become complementary rather than working along in parallel.
Thank you. John, clearly a very big role for council here. Joan already told us that Melbourne's been through one big reiteration of its energy standards and is now working on another. Is there real integration and momentum in Auckland Council to bring these issues together in an integrated way? And making sure that there is good linkage between the components?
It's a great question, Rod. I think the clear answer is yes, but the clear next question is how. And I think that's what we're trying to do as part of this plan. I think that's why we have such brains and minds in this room with us, is that, I think we're talking less, I want to give credence to the emissions and the fact that we need to measure that because it matters. And that's what's warming things up, and that's what's causing trouble. One of the many things. But I think if you take a more human-centered, what is the experience like as a human being in our cities and towns? And you start from there, and you say, well, what does a transport system ideally look like? What does a healthy indoor air quality look like? What does a system of producing and using food and resources look like? And then I think you can easily see the connections between those things. And you almost map out the customer journey. You almost think about what does a resident need to do to enjoy their life, and how can we do that most effectively for everybody? And actually, to your point, how can we do that fairly and unlock ourselves from this unfortunate consequence where we're letting a lot of our community down? We're a hyper-diverse community, and around the world, it's nice to see that, maybe I should step away from this panel, but most panels look like me, not like this. And most people that look like they're in charge look like this and not how they should be. So I think thinking about the deep structural issues and kia ora for your contributions, actually unlocking what's at the core of some of this challenge. And our public spaces, our transport system, our food networks, our waste system looks a lot better if we're actually providing for everybody and keeping that squarely in mind as we do.
Thanks. Kira, a good question for you. From what you're seeing, and I'm not picking on the council here, the council is us, in a sense, but from your very clear and impassioned view on this, what's missing in the overarching plans we have at the moment and our mechanisms for trying to bring these together in a more powerful way? What would you think is absolutely essential to add to this, so we get to that huge health of place and people? Yep, that's yours.
I think I can possibly sum this up in 2 words, which is power analysis. I think, to expand on those 2 words, if I may.
Yep.
I think council has been doing a lot of awesome stuff. I'm really privileged that in another hat that I wear, I get to make awesome films and media with on social and environmental causes. And council, in collaboration with Hapai Te Hauora, have really been backing an amazing kaupapa, an amazing project there, which led to me meeting these wonderful wahine here. And I was really impressed with them getting behind the idea of co-design and doing that in our films, because I know that that can be scary when we start out and they say, okay, so what are the things, what's going to be in this film, what's going to be in the series? And we're like, well, we don't know. We don't know because we haven't had the co-design yet. And we don't know because the rangatahi need to be sharing that, and we need to make sure that we're stepping back. And, you know, even myself as someone who really, really is likes to cling on to that rangatahi mantle and is reluctantly letting that go, I think even in my capacity there, I need to recognise that that's not necessarily a space that I need to be taking up, and that the way that, you know, if I'm running a co-design, or if I'm designing even a film that's going out, or a social media plan or campaign or whatever, that's actually a huge amount of power, and I think we need to be really conscious about how we wield that power, because as has been mentioned, and as I kind of alluded to before, as you also addressed it, so it's great to be on a panel where people are, you know, seem to all be on the same page there, is that there is a huge amount of inequity, and that results from huge power imbalances. And so I think Council's been doing some really awesome stuff and supporting projects where we are experimenting with power and co-design and relinquishing some of that power. I'd really like to see more of that. I think that there are huge opportunities for communities themselves to be taking leadership, particularly when it comes to things like consultations and things. You know, the questions that you know, policymakers, or the questions that people working in council might be asking may be quite different from the questions that need to be asked for communities to really and authentically have their voices heard and then their needs met. So I'd like to see perhaps more of that. I think it is going in that direction. I think encompassed by the fact that we're all here and having some kind of feedback into the system, rather than simply a document to go and proofread and submit online and write a great big submission about. I think that's a really big step in the next direction, but I think I would like to see that go further and further and further, so that the people who aren't in this room, particularly, you know, like I've already mentioned, Indigenous people, rangatahi, but also people with disabilities. I think they're a huge section, or we are a huge section of the population that are not having our voices heard in the way that they need to be. And I think a lot of climate action, when we're looking at housing, when we're looking at transport, when we're looking at all of this kind of infrastructure, needs to be designed from the very root to be accessible, and that can't be an afterthought. So we need to have more of those people in those rooms feeding in from the very, very, very beginning, not way down the track.
Fine, thank you. Before I go to the question for Nairuma, I just want to say this is the last question I'm going to ask. So please, can you start flagging down people with microphones? They've got their hands up there at the back. So when we come to your questions, we're ready to go with those. Thanks very much indeed. Nairuma, Ngāti Whātua has some land in some very strategic places, particularly in the centre of town. So how has this big shift in perspective and ambition that's been going on affected your thinking as an iwi about how you develop those assets? In other words, do you now think this is going to be a bit different in some respects than you might have been thinking about, say, 6-8 years ago?
Yeah, no doubt. So, yep, we're in a master planning process at the moment. So we are actively thinking about those issues and learning also from what former Waterfront Auckland, how they thought about it and dealing with those issues as well in terms of sea level rise and what you might put on a ground floor or a basement, et cetera. And so, yeah, it is very much at the forefront of our minds. But I just want to come back to the question around this whole plan and how it can be knitted together. And unfortunately, I'm old enough now, 21 years in these kinds of roles, to have seen a few cracks at this. I think back to Mayor Dick Hubbard's time, and he established a sustainability workforce, task force. I think we met about 4 times and came up with a plan, and then he was unseated by John Banks II. and that plan was immediately chucked in the bin. And then we had the advent of the Super City and Mayor Len Brown, who then kicked off the Auckland Low Carbon Action Plan, I think it was. And so it's a bit of deja vu, I'm sure, for many of you in the room. And so with this action plan, I think that is our big challenge now, is actually to action it. In thinking about the forum, we're having discussions and challenging ourselves, particularly around our whakatauki, our proverbs. We're all familiar with he aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Notwithstanding that's been completely taken out of context by many corporate organisations. But what is the most important thing? It is people, it is people, it is people. Yeah, we've been asking ourselves, well, is that right? Are we interpreting that as putting people at the centre of everything? And I'm hearing human-centred experiences and views. And we were challenging ourselves on that. The whakatauki that we really clinged on to, which resonated, more applicable here, was around whatu ngaro ngaro te tangata toitu te whenua, which means the land always remains and people perish. And so don't be so arrogant to think that the gods thought that we were meant to live forever. The only way we're going to live forever is through our actions and what we do. And so that is really at the core of our Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum worldview, is that we have to reposit ourselves part of the environment and then put the onus back on us, that the gods never intended us to live forever and ever, because the land will always be there and it'll heal itself. So if we want to live, then we must act. And so I think we need to have a really amazing comms PR campaign to really get those sorts of messages to hit all of our different communities, including our own people who've become disconnected from a lot of that kōrero.
Fine, thank you very much indeed. Microphones, any takers? I can see two in the back there, thank you. Can I go first to the lady over there who's...
So I have a question for John. There's been talk here today about involving the people in a genuine way, but my concern is not so much about the consultations going to take place over the next month or two, but beyond that, I'm hoping that the sustainability plan includes, people have talked about a people's panel or something, so that there are some people from the community who are involved in some degree of oversight of how the thing is going, what we need to do better, what hasn't worked so well, that kind of thing. So any thoughts on that?
Thanks, Graham. Can we just all volunteer to be on that panel and we'll just get it sorted? Is that a good start? I think it's a good question, and I think what we're trying to do is see beyond the plan, because I think to take, sort of the nod from Narimu on this one, if it sits on a shelf, I'm paraphrasing, I apologize, it's not going to really do the action bit of this. So we've thought about this, we don't have an answer, but if we aren't convening a group like this frequently to talk about how the world's changed, how we've been successful, how we've failed and need to change even more, then we probably wouldn't have been doing our job very well. There are a couple things that are currently set up, and I wanted to just give a hat tip to the independent advisory group, which was appointed by the mayor and councillor chairs. Dr. Rhys Jones, Dr. Maria Barge, and Dr. David Hall are all here. And there's a lot of doctors there. But I think the point is there's an independent group, much like a mini climate commission, keeping us honest about where we're going. And those individuals, you'll hear from them later about how this matters beyond just emissions and beyond just resilience and adapting to climate impacts, but what it means for health, for human communities, for the natural environment. So, look, I hear that quite clearly. We have, my team and I are so dedicated to make this actually a living plan that's evolving and changing, that keeps ratcheting up its ambition. Obviously, we need to take a steer from you as a local board elected member and our councillors to make sure that we get the clear political mandate to move forward, but that's what we want to do. And collectively, I think that's what we can do.
In a sense, is there so far a missing part of this architecture, which is there are the five flagship projects and the rest, but it's actually about being able to articulate some things that people can identify with and want to take their own individual action, and so it inspires people to make that infinitesimally small contribution themselves, which then aggregates up. 'Cause it's about empowering and motivating everybody, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can that be part of the plan?
It has to be, and to acknowledge Sophie Hayway and her team who are here. Live Lightly. I mean, we have campaigns and programs going on right now to talk about what each of us can do individually, and actually how that knits into the larger picture. So if we all just, we should all think about our diets, think about our transport choices and all that. If that's all we do, we wouldn't make as much progress as using that as a lever into what we can do systemically to address some of the big issues. I think that's a gateway, and I think I commend programs like that, Parakore, and some of the great work happening in the community as ways to make it tangible and real for people, and as a gateway into thinking, how can we do this if we do it together? If we actually leverage our collective power on what's wrong and what's constraining us from taking action. I mean, there's a lot of policies we'll have to change at council. There's a lot of central government we need to align in the right direction. This is an all hands on deck exercise, and collectively we could be aiming at what those key big systemic changes are as we do our own part at the same time.
And the council learning new ways to do that, rather than being a sort of a rather paternalistic, top-down kind of disseminate the knowledge kind of thing.
You said it, not me.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Next question, please, lady at the back.
Cool. Malolei, ko hoko hingoa ko Emily. Sorry, I was a bit late to this whānau, so apologies if this has already been covered or touched on. But I just wanted to know, probably for you, John, what engagement has there been with the Pacific community? Because I know that, and hopefully we all know that the Pacific is being directly impacted by climate change. And we also know that this is the Auckland Climate Action Plan, and most of our Pacific community here live in Auckland. And most of our migrants from the Pacific now are coming over to New Zealand, to Auckland, because of climate change from our Pacific realm countries like Kiribati, Tuvalu, Tokelau. So I just wanted to know what talanoa has there been with the Pacific community, and this might be for everyone, if you guys have communicated or had dialogue with the Pacific community, and how they can input into this, and how you can also better engage with them, because most of our Pacific community won't go online and put a submission, and you need to go directly to them. Malo.
Maybe I'll take a first crack at that, and I can kind of look to my left and right for some additional advice here. Maybe two words that come to my mind first, which is not enough, just to register that. We've gone to all of the advisory panels as a start. I mean, I've got a tremendous team of about a dozen very talented people who are walking around the room right now. So to give them a huge shout out and say, we've tried our best to get to 170 elected members. We've tried to get to all the advisory panels, Pacifica panel, youth advisory panel, disability panel. We've used them as gateways into that conversation. I think what the next step is to actually get out to talk to people. And there's a limited ability for us to do that as a small team, but there's a strong commitment recognizing the significance for the Pacific region, for what it means for our neighbors in the South Pacific, and for what kind of solutions we actually need to see. And I'd like to commit to you right now that we will not just take the consultation approach. This is usually where things start, right here. We're like, hey, we're about to write a plan. Just to let you know, let's write it and let's talk to you about it. We've been talking to some degree with people for the last 10 or so months about it, and we've encouraged, to your point, yes, there's an online digital platform. That's great, but not if you don't go online. We've gone out and had hui with folks, but we actually haven't been able to reach 1.6 million people. So maybe the commitment is we want to do that better. The commitment, we will put energy to that. But the request is, can you please help us do that well? And can you please feed in and advise us and steer us in the directions we need to go to get that done the way we should?
Fine, thank you.
Excuse me, sorry, can I answer?
Oh, yes, no, sorry, please do.
I just want to start by saying kia ora to that question. I totally agree with you on that. There is a massive lack of our Pacific community, especially our rangatahi engagement. I think what we've noticed, Wyatt and I, in our rangatahi kind of journey with this, through Parakore, is that it's not, this kind of thing isn't cool to talk about, and it's not a popular topic to talk about, especially with our Pacific and our Māori communities. what Waiata and I are doing is we are actively going into our Pacific communities. We're on the ground, we're literally going into our marae and our whānau, and we're talking to them about these changes and about what we can do. In our Rangatahi Summit, we're definitely focusing on Pacific communities as well. I'm Samoan, so it's massive for me to get our voices heard. Specifically with these topics, because we're not heard regularly, and our Pacific communities aren't an option, well, not an option, but like we're not. I don't know how to explain this, but we're not not really heard very well. So just getting on the ground and doing that. So yeah.
Kia ora, and just to add to that as well, just one thing that I feel like I should point out is that Māori and Pacific people don't learn the same way as others. We are more action-based people. We don't sit and listen. We would rather do it, and we are more action than talking, really. And so, if one thing that I would say, if you want to feed or inform or engage with our Pacific communities and our Māori communities, it is to be kanohi ki te kanohi. It is to be face to face in front of them and to work with them, not talk to them, work with them. So,
No, thank you. Kira, yes.
Kia ora. I just want to add one tiny little thing, and fully acknowledging that I'm Māori. I don't have any direct stakeholdership in the wider Pacific, but I have many friends and whānau and people I've worked with at the UN Indigenous space who do hail from the Pacific and have shared their stories with me. And I just want to touch on that, and going off what you've said around, you know, different communities and different cultures having different ways of engaging. I think that's huge. And I think it's not just ways of engaging, but also the different narratives that we tell and how that is going to engage people, because we can't just be constantly talking about communities like, oh, we're trying, but we need to hear from the community. Like, I do get that. Like, I get that that's a thing, and in council and in any kind of organisation, there are huge limitations like that. But I think we need to acknowledge that a huge amount of labour that goes into that as well, because, you know, to participate and to be able to participate civically is a huge privilege for many people. And it shouldn't be. It should be a right, I believe. But the reality is that me being able to go and do climate change stuff, to come to places like this, is propped up by the fact that I can live at home with my whānau that I've been doing for way too many years. The fact that I have been privileged enough to have a particular education and certain opportunities that have allowed me to engage within a system that looks like this, and which I will say a system that looks quite white. It's a particularly Western system, and I don't think we should be necessarily trying to force other communities or other cultures into that system, but rather trying to figure out how can we actually expand the borders and the parameters of those boxes, and how can we actually be humble and learn from those communities and acknowledge the huge amount of labour that goes into this. Because, you know, one of the other rangatahi that I was talking to when I was doing this project, this video project with these two, and with Freya at the front here as well, shared a really important whakaaro, Hayley Koroi, incredible wahine, and something she said really resonated with me, which is that, you know, particularly as rangatahi Māori, rangatahi Pacifica, and, you know, other structurally oppressed groups, there is so much to do. Like, there is so much to do. You know, you're going to work every day, you're having to feed your families, you're having to then, you know, navigate racism, you're having to navigate employment stuff, you're having to navigate all of these other things that people like myself have a huge privilege to not have to deal with. And it's only in the dying hours of the day that they then have capacity or energy to invest. And so one thing that I would really like to see is for those structurally oppressed communities to be acknowledged appropriately and compensated for the mahi that they are doing, because it shouldn't be free labour. Like this, you know, we all have a stake in this equity. We should all be doing what we can to enable people to feed into it in whatever way is appropriate to them, and to provide, I think, in many ways, the you know, the pūtea. Where's the pūtea for these organisations to be doing the mahi that they're doing and to be sharing their whakaaro? So, yeah, I've talked enough.
Valuable contribution, thank you. All the questions are in the back. After this question in the back, may I encourage the microphones to sorry, the people with the microphones. Microphones don't have legs, but they, you know, sorry. Gentleman at the back there, thank you.
Kia ora. Check. Kia ora anō, Jason Marerua, Te Uhu Mana Ranatahi. 2 questions. My first question to John and Joan. Firstly, what's obvious to me is that the value system between the Indigenous worldview and Indigenous knowings and Indigenous science is very different to the science and worldview and knowings that you provide. So to John and Joan, my question is, how are you ensuring the Indigenous knowledge, knowings and science is leading your thinking and leading your actions? My second question is to you, Ngārimu. How satisfied is mana whenua that your ideas, knowledge and science is leading the work in terms of what your partnership and relationship with Auckland Council? Kia ora.
Whoever wants to go first, Joan.
I don't think I deal with this difficult issue in my scope of work, and I probably should think about it. I will say that the purpose of the C40 network is to generate knowledge that is shared then across different contexts, and it's really important that it reflects the Indigenous people of all the cities that we work in. So there is a lack of that value set in the work that I've presented, and it's a real gap.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I'd say, you know, look, we're not getting this right. And just a bit of a hat tip to the last question and actually the points that were made. I mean, we need to, I will try to answer your question directly, but I think the first thing in my mind is we need to fundamentally change not just how Auckland Council works. I mean, my political masters, I don't want to take too many missteps here, but we actually need to evolve. You know, we have kind of a monopoly on the market here, and we're the only regional council or local council, and there's no competition. We can just keep doing it. We actually need to find ways of changing how we do our core business, and that means fundamentally looking at democracy. And are we actually getting the voices we need to make the decisions that we make? And right now, I'd say from my perch, as a pretty privileged middle-aged white guy, no, actually. I mean, for me, it works really, really well. But we're not getting that fundamental representation in the voices we need to hear to make the changes we need to make, because we still have the problems. How we're doing that with mana whenua, I will let them be the judge of how well we're doing that. My suspicion is that there is some suspicion that we've been here before. We've tried this before. Come and let's work in partnership. We say the same words. We might not embody the same behaviors that actually really mean partnership in how we see the world. It's my view, at least, that these need to fundamentally coexist in a way that builds off each other. We've got great evidence through Joan's work and her wider team's work, through the work we've done on the impacts of climate change to Auckland. That's evidence base we're using for the plan, just like the Mātauranga and Kaupapa Māori is something we need to draw on and put right at the center of the plan. How to do that? The first way we're trying is to work with the Kaitiaki Forum, is to hui with as many iwi who would like to talk with us directly about that, and to work with the rangatahi. I mean, some of the work that has been done in the space and the rangatahi here on this panel with me is a testimony to the power of doing that well. So let's be honest where we are. It's not where we need to be, but let's build off some of the momentum we've done in this process. It's quite a bit different than we've done before.
Thanks.
Just building on that, it is about how we share power, and we aren't there yet. That's clear, and that's at a national level. That's at local government, where we struggle for our people to get elected. We don't have wards. I think only Eastern Bay Plenty has Māori wards for elected representatives to go that pathway. However, in Tāmaki, I think this is the best I've seen it in terms of the opportunities. Saying it's not what we're aspiring to, but it is the best I've seen it in 20 years. We have 2 independent Māori statutory board members.
who sit on most committees. We have the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum, as under-resourced as it is there. And we have most departments of council, and particularly this one, wanting to hear from us. It's still, though, very much a challenge to be able to influence to the degree that my ancestors envisioned when they welcomed Governor Hobson to the land here, along at Te Rere Ngōreti, at Point Britomart, in terms of how we share that power and design the city and operate the city and manage the city. We aren't there yet, but it is there are a lot of doors open, and thankfully we have more of a backline now to throw the ball to with our rangatahi, create the space so that they can dot down in the corner for us, older haggard ones. But we aren't there yet, but as mana whenua, we also need to work on ourselves. We are coming out of a pretty traumatic experience of the last 175 years with loss of land, culture, environment, and then to sit around the table with each other again, having lost those connections for so many generations, and now trying to work out how best we can be effective together and put aside our raru for the ultimate prize, which is oranga for our mokopuna to come.
Thank you. Before our next question, I want to alert you to how I'm going to end this session in about 12 minutes' time. We need to borrow from the student marches on Friday. We want climate action, we want it now. So I want to have a really quick fire session, no microphones, but one at a time. To do, how do you suggest we put some real action into this action plan? How do we do action like we've never done it before? So you need to be really succinct, because I want to get lots of views to come up this way. It'll all be recorded, so it won't be lost. So I'll leave that thought with you before we have a few more questions. Lady down here, thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Rochelle Kahui Makono taku ingoa, parakora ki Tāmaki. Noho Mama, the Live Lightly program, spent quite a time with our mana whenua mā tā waka community, asking them what it is, what are the most appropriate ways of talking to and working with mana whenua mā tā waka. To date, I haven't seen enough resourcing of the Live Lightly Noho Mama program to have made any difference. They certainly haven't come back to us, and we did the consultation. And I think that goes to your question about a panel. So we know actually what that action plan needs. It's across the world what needs to happen. My statement here with rangatahi involvement going forward is that it is the resourcing following the action plan and the commitment to mātauranga Māori, mana whenua mā tā waka Pacifica rights, and Indigenous people from across the world that needs to have funding towards it. That's a statement, it wasn't a question, if you didn't guess that. To Pianina and Waiata, what does the plan, how do we get our rangatahi speaking? How do we get out there and do it? And can you just talk a little bit, when we first started talking about this kaupapa, we spoke a lot about Indigenous global rangatahi voice globally. So where do you feel like you fit within the global picture, and how, to tell John so that he can go start to advocate for funding, how do we get our rangatahi voice heard?
Give me a second. Me too. I think a massive way to portray our voice further would be social media. Everyone knows that our generation is the generation that has, our phones in our hands 24/7. So I think resources towards portraying our voice, like when we worked with Kira, we did an episode for this climate change kaupapa, and we had an awesome response from that. So I think getting our voices out on social media that way. And making sure that our Indigenous voice is heard through social media as well as portraying it from the ground.
What I would add to that is that rangatahi are not used to being heard. We are not used to standing up. We are not used to being a voice. And only just recently have I gotten the confidence to be able to sit here in front of all of you. So if you want to hear a rangatahi's voice, you need to let them know that they are in a safe enough space. Let them know what it is that they want and that it is okay for them to stand up and say it. Because we aren't used to we aren't given the privilege of standing up for our people unless it is with our people, unless we are backed by a group, or if we are standing next to people that we know that we feel safe, that we can say what we want to say. And so if you want to hear the rangatahi voice, then just be involved with it.
Also, if you want to hear the rangatahi voice, just listen to us.
And presumably we can find you on social media if we...
Yep,
so
hashtag Parakore. Parakore ki Tamaki, or on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah, spell it out for people. Yep.
Well, read my shirt.
Well, just look for the T-shirts during lunchtime. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. One question, gentlemen. I'll take two. Sorry, gentlemen here. Thank you. See how we go, time-wise.
Hello.
Thank you.
I hope this question is understood to be useful to ask. I want to hear from the northern part of the panel, please, not from the council, perhaps, except in response. Do you think it will help if Auckland declares a climate emergency?
Yes. Yep. 100%.
Excellent. Short answer, and I'm expecting an equally short answer from the council as representative here. John.
There's no disagreement here. I don't get to make that decision because I'm not a decision maker. So I'm looking back to one of our stalwart champions, Councillor Chris Darby, who's in the back, perhaps Councillor Pennyhouse as well. I mean, look, other cities have done this, and I don't think I disagree. We need to call it what it is. It's an emergency, and it's not just for our climate, it's for our people, it's for our land, it's for quite a bit more.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, can I just feed into that question? We, as rangatahi, know that we have a voice, and you guys obviously have heard that, but it's time to give us the opportunity to be heard, and the fact that we want to pull the emergency brake, we want to, my thing for some reason is to just for one day turn all of the gas companies off, like just every single gas supplier for one day, just turn them off, because obviously the economy is going to crash and things are going to happen, but one day eventually we're going to run out of fossil fuels, and one day eventually this is going to happen. So give us the platform to just do it. Just let us turn the gas companies off for one day. Let's see what happens. I don't know. So just give us the platform, I guess.
Yes, let's have a test run of catastrophe. This is good.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to happen
we got to practice this stuff. Yeah. No, I'm with you all the way. Sorry.
No, I was just about to say that because, I mean, it's going to happen eventually. We are going to run out of our resources or energy. One day we are going to have to live with the fact that we are going to have to start growing our own stuff, providing our own things. If we turn off the gas companies now, what's going to happen? Well, none of us know.
It's also, like we saw from that graph that the transport is such a massive thing. So isn't that kind of the best place to start, I guess?
Yep, absolutely. Now, what I want to do in the next 5 minutes is just to get some individual thoughts about how we put some real action into this plan. If you have such a thought, could you put up your hand so I can point to you? I'm not trying to be a teacher here. Think of me as the conductor of the orchestra, just calling on a lone solo instrument for a very short bar of music, which will be absolute music to John's ears. The lady there at the back. Thank you. And we might need to do this without microphones because we're going to go really fast. Yes, you, please.
Kia ora. I just want to remind us all about the huge resource power and value that's sitting in the arts sector to motivate, inspire, provoke, educate and create behavioural change.
Fine, thank you very much indeed. Sarah. Right, David, stand up and talk big and loud. Fine, thank you. Lady there, thank you. Yes, thank you. Any takers over on this side? I wouldn't want this to be imbalanced. So ways to put some real action into this plan. There's the flagship projects. Those are all great. And it could be focused on those 5 or... Yes, the lady there. Thank you.
I'd suggest reaching out to community groups like Grand and Transition Towns Group and Avocado, or looking for inspiration and lots of people ready to do something.
Fantastic, thank you. Lady here, just stand up and speak up.
We talked about the, or somebody talked about a citizens panel, but what we need in that citizens panel is really good representation from Indigenous groups and from other groups that we mentioned here now. But one that works with council on the way that they are actually implementing their plans and provide some kind of accountability chart to them actually meeting those targets.
Fine, thank you. I'm coming back over this side. Hands up, anybody who's got... Gentleman there, yes, thank you.
How do we accelerate the electrification of public transport? Like trains, buses and ferries.
Thank you, and taxis. Could you hear that over there? Every organisation do a sustainable carbon reduction plan. Thank you, Manjula. Philly down here.
Hi. I would really just like to say that I think it would be really valuable if you work with schools in South Auckland, mainly just making the information accessible to all kids. There's a lot of inequity in our education system, and I think it's really important that the kids who are being the most affected know about this, because I feel there's a lack of information going out to them that they are able to understand, and that will create the biggest change if we include all of our time.
Thank you. Lady over there. Thank you.
Just talking about biodiversity enhancement through our brownfield development, infrastructure development. We're talking about infrastructure, physical infrastructure. We need to talk about natural infrastructure so that that's where the resilience comes from for our whole.
Thank you. Go to lady there. Thank you. Affordable public transport for everyone, but particularly those people who have really needed it. Thank you. Lady right at the back there, thank you. Could you just talk up really loud? Thanks.
I love the idea of the urban farms from fees, but also I think there's a massive opportunity for transport. So what Paris does, the no cars day, some of the Asian countries do it, do something really radical with transport in Auckland. So to say no cars on the roads this day, I don't know, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman there.
I think if you want action on the plan, you've got to look
Could
outside the plan.
louder, thank you.
I think if you want action on the plan, you've got to look outside the plan. I think John made the best comment. He's not a decision maker. This is structural, this is about politics, and it's about power. And those are things we need to come back to. Everyone in this room sort of agrees, but when we get outside the room, it gets difficult.
Okay, thank you.
Can I quickly respond to that? Just quickly, just say, Our panel, with due respect to the two champions that I know of in the room, our panel is our councillors and our mayor, and so we all have a voice in who that is and how they represent our views, so please keep that in mind, not just during the day that you vote, but every day.
Thank you. I'm going to take two more. Lady there and then a young person down here. Yes, thank you. Sorry, can you... Very good. That might put a bit of oomph into local government elections. That would be fine. Thank you. Yes, can you... Thank you. There is not a single subject in the school curriculum. So, no, I was about to get involved in a complicated double negative. Every subject in the school curriculum has something to do with climate change. So, absolutely. I said two, but one last lady there. Thank you. Yes. Nature flourishing in the city. Thank you very much indeed. Very briefly, a big thank you and a big hand to Pia, to Nairimu, to Waiata. I got the wrong way around. Waiata. Sorry, let me start again. To Waiata, to Nairimu, to Pia, to Kira, to John, and to Joan. A very big hand for them all, please. Thank you very much indeed. Whilst they exit, I'm about to welcome up a very special person. I have a number of heroes of various kinds, but Boyd Swinburne is absolutely one of them, for not just being a terrific scientist, based here at the University of Auckland in the School of Population Health, but also Deakin University in Melbourne. Absolutely one of the world authorities on obesity and how we might tackle that. So he's co-chair of World Obesity Policy and Prevention as an organization. But that's not, that's all very good. But Boyd is the most fearless campaigner I know on these issues, one of the most fearless campaigners I know on any issue, and I know that comes at great personal cost because of the nature of how these things work. And if John wants a second career, he should come and talk to me about being an investigative journalist. I think you'd be really good. A very big welcome for Boyd, please. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much, Rod. Thanks for that introduction. And also I do recognise I'm talking about food just before lunch, and it's all out there and it looks fantastic, so I'll try and be quick on this. I guess this is my pointer. Okay, I want to talk about food, health and climate, and as Penny said earlier, there are some people with pointy heads, and I'm one of those, and it's been fantastic to hear today about what the reality is on the ground, where the council is going, where businesses are going, the ideas that have sprung up. I have to say it was interesting, with 50% of our greenhouse gases as coming from food and agriculture, the number of food companies in that leadership group was very small. In fact, I'm not even sure that there was one. I'll have to go back, have a look at all those logos. We definitely need to step up in this whole space. So I'm going to talk this is a trailer basically for what's happening tomorrow. We have a 2-hour symposium tomorrow on food, on this great intergenerational food transformation, which is what needs to happen within a generation. We need to shift our food system to something that's fit for purpose for the 21st century. There are 2 Lancet Commission reports that just came out in January. We'll be talking about that. That's the pointy-headed part, but also looking at how that can convert into the real world, and particularly into Auckland. And we'll have a panel discussion with Penny Hulse, Megan Tunks and Rachel Brown. So what I just want to quickly give you is a bit of a preview. I'm going to show you some pictures, some schema to try to show you what the thinking is and how we've been operating that's come out of these 2 Lancet Commission reports, and create the story, the imperative for this great intergenerational food transformation. The gift, what are we giving to, what's our legacy as adults to our children and our grandchildren. The New Zealand situation, a couple of the general recommendations, and then some of the areas where cities can take leadership. So first of all, let me talk to you about the planetary, the planetary diet, Eat Planetary Diet, that's come out of the Eat Commission. So this produced this report, and what they tried to do was to assess what is a healthy diet that can be sustained within planetary boundaries. And a little bit hard to write behind me there, but there's a sort of a donut in the middle there, which is, oh, no, it's not even showing up. Let me show you. There's a donut here in the middle, which is the safe zone. If we go above that, then that's breaking planetary boundaries for sustainability. If we go below that, that's unhealthy for humans. And so what is the win-win, which is down here, where we can have healthy diets which are also sustainable. So they've done a lot of the analysis on that, trying to work that out. This is what the plate looks like. It's mostly fruit, vegetables, pulses, nuts, those sorts of things. Whole grain cereals. A lot of the cereals that we get in our diet have been refined and transformed into highly processed products. The big challenge is, I think, around this protein area, around where meat fits into the diet, and they've expanded it out here, and there's a little tiny sliver called beef, lamb and pork, and that is going to be a huge challenge, because if we're going to shift towards this planetary diet, not only do we need to increase the plant base of our diet and the whole food nature of it, but also shift our protein sources into vegetable sources. Quite a lot of the pushback from this report has come from the meat industry, but also a surprising amount of pushback actually from people who are sort of the low carb is the ketogenic diet type people who believe that high doses of meat is the answer for health. For the Lancet Commission on Obesity, we looked at what is the contribution of food or poor nutrition, called malnutrition in all its forms, to the global burden of disease. And for that, we joined up the contributions from obesity, from undernutrition, and what are called dietary risks, which is all of the components in our diet, like a diet high in salt and high in trans fats and low in fruit and vegetables and low in nuts, that contribute to chronic disease. When you add all those things together, and for the first time we've been able to do this, we find that at the global level, malnutrition in all its forms is by far the biggest contributor to ill health and premature death globally. And that's true for every country. The mix and match for the different countries is different according to wealth. Here at the bottom I've got the high income countries, and you can see that most of our malnutrition is made up of the effects of obesity and the effects of poor diet on chronic disease. We don't have a lot of undernutrition in this country. But whatever the country, malnutrition and therefore the food systems are the problem. For middle-income countries in particular, countries like Malaysia or Latin American countries and so on, they still have big problems with undernutrition, starving children, stunted children, at the same time that obesity and diabetes is screaming up behind them. So they're dealing with both undernutrition and obesity and heart disease, diabetes, driven by the same food system. It's the same food system that's supporting both of these problems. And so we have to start seeing these things as a collective, which is why we've joined it up as malnutrition in all its forms. So for a country like New Zealand, Tobacco will be the next highest risk factor, followed by diabetes and high blood pressure. So the biggest killer by far on this planet is malnutrition in all its form. And that is only going to get worse with climate change, as we get weather events, as we get changes in cropping and so on. And that will affect, it's very clear, will affect the poor people and the poor nations. Now, the way that we've been thinking about it, so I'm talking about worldviews and how we view things, the way we think about health classically is this, what we call the socio-ecological model. People come in as individuals, they have their own genetic and behaviours and all that sort of things, but we know that they're influenced by their social networks, their family and whānau, the meso, the settings, the schools, the workplaces, the education system, the health system, the taxation systems, and all that's dictated by the governance through the economics and policies. That's how we kind of look at it. It's a little bit like how the world saw itself 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, geocentric. The Earth is the centre of the universe. Here we think about individuals being the centre of the problem. Now, when we come to try to think about a problem such as climate change and malnutrition, all its forms, food systems, we actually have to think beyond the individual. And the individual-centric approaches, they're very helpful in many aspects, but for those big picture problems we're trying to deal with, they are not fit for purpose. So what we've done is taken this model and actually turned it inside out. Put the big systems, the drivers, on the inside. And in fact, the way that we think about health classically through this model doesn't even have the natural environment in it. Completely missing. So we've turned it around and said what's got to be at the centre is natural systems, and then out on the outside of that we've put all of our man-made systems, starting with governance in the centre and then the macro systems and so on. And from our natural systems that we're all dependent on, plus what we've added on top, our man-made systems, we want 4 major outcomes. We want human health and well-being, we want social equity, we want economic prosperity, and we want ecological health and well-being. The ecological health and well-being is the one that suffered the most over these last decades. So that's the kind of general picture, turning the way that we normally think about health inside out, putting the natural systems at the centre, seeing that we are highly dependent on them, and putting the big systems further towards the centre. So when we drill down on some of this and saying, okay, I'm now going to zoom in on this a bit, and I'm going to look at just these areas here: obesity, undernutrition, and climate change. And these things are connected. They're deeply connected. Not only do they affect each other, climate change is going to cause a whole pile of undernutrition through food insecurity, and children and infants that are born undernourished and stunted end up having a high risk of diabetes. So these things are already interconnected. But they are also, and this is what's not commonly appreciated, they're also driven by the same systems. These man-made systems that we've created, the focus on GDP, the way we've created our food systems, our transport systems, they are common drivers of both the poor health and the climate change. And so seeing those things are connected at a deep level, and we're talking about food here, so that's just one part of it. The 4 big systems are food, transport, urban design, and land use that are creating what we're calling the global syndemic. So these 3 things, obesity, undernutrition, climate change, we're calling the global syndemic, which is a synergy of epidemics, and in this case pandemics, which interact with each other and have common drivers. We need to be thinking about these things together. And if we can deal with some of the drivers for one, then we'll deal with the drivers for the others. When we dive down, we find that these things are complex adaptive systems. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but if you want to understand why we have the food systems we have, why we have to change them and why they are so difficult to change, you have to start thinking in systems terms, complex adaptive systems. You try to do one push and you get a pushback the other way. The reason that we have to change our food system, here's our the governance and the business loops and the supply and demand systems. The reason we have to change them is that they are destroying our environment and they are destroying our health. So we have to rethink this whole system for the 21st century. And I haven't even talked about individuals yet. Where do we fit into this? They're lost in the big zoomed out view. But when we zoom in, we find actually individuals are throughout the system. We operate under many different roles as parents, employees, customers, consumers, voters. We participate in nature, all sorts of things. We have many different places where we interact with these systems. And we're also rethinking the role of the individual. Yes, we are influenced by these, and to some degree we are victims of the environments out there, but we are also agents. And we have to use that agency in all of our walks of life to try to shift this along. So these new perspectives, I think, are helpful. The food systems creating the largest cause of premature death, as I said, and big cause of greenhouse gas, 50% in New Zealand, major cause of inequities, and while they're a source of wealth for many, they do end up trapping people in poverty cycles. Foods as complex adaptive systems, I talked about that, and these diets, especially the Western diets, will need to drastically change if we want to stay within planetary boundaries. Particularly increasing vegetables, fruits, nuts and so on, reducing red meat and added sugar, big changes in fish consumption, dairy and whole grains. The New Zealand situation, I think New Zealand needs to take leadership in this. We're a small country, we're a wealthy country, we've got innovation, and this is a huge problem for us because this is where our wealth and prosperity comes from, as well as our greenhouse gases and our pollution of our rivers and our health problems. But if we're not going to take leadership on this, we're going to have the influence of other countries imposed upon us. I think we need to work out how to do this properly. But we do have gigantically powerful food lobbies in this country. There will be pushback. We only need to look at the track record within public health. When we try to get pressure on public health, the food industry is party to demolishing the Public Health Commission, to preventing public health legislation getting up and so on. So that is a big job. We shouldn't underestimate that. General recommendations from the Eat Lancet Commission are there. You can read those. They are about creating commitments. They're about reorienting agricultural practices, intensifying food production but in a sustainable way, getting better governance of land, food and oceans, and halving food waste. And from the Lancet Commission, we talk about these double and triple duty actions. And I've just given one example there, which is around sustainable dietary guidelines. We do have dietary guidelines in this country, and they do lead on to other policies, but they haven't taken into account sustainability. Only 5 countries in the world have got sustainable dietary guidelines. That's where we have to start. And if they do that, then that will have a triple duty effect. So there are a whole bunch of these triple duty actions that we need to look for that can be win-win-win situations. In terms of at the city level, urban food systems, you saw from the pattern of greenhouse gases within a city, that's quite different to what the pattern is nationally, and I think we need to take that into account. But urban food systems are a great opportunity. We don't have, in general, municipal governments are not engaged heavily within food systems apart from things like food regulation and food safety and so on. They're not kind of all pulled together. But there is great opportunity. C40, we've heard about the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here. and examples of actions in the city which you've already heard about. For me personally, I think this governance one is the biggest one. How do we get a food policy council? Because in my experience, in a city or in a country, there are many food groups. People are passionate about food. They have their own particular takes on it, but there's a lot of energy around food. But there's no overall kind of governance structure, no platform for people to come together and manifest that energy to create synergies. So if we're going to set up anything here, I'd say a food council, a food policy council would be first. So just to summarise, a lot of these major reports are coming together. They're telling the same story. They're saying food, climate, health all need to be included together. The challenge is how do we achieve that? And how do we overcome the major resistance that there will be? This concept of policy inertia. You know, when I look at obesity and I look at the number of reports that are out there about what we should be doing about obesity, I could stack them this high. And they're unimplemented. They're unimplemented because the policy inertia is actually a part of the system in itself. And you try to push on one thing and get some movement, and you get big pushback and nothing happens. So I think we need to be thinking about policy inertia as intrinsic to the systems that we're trying to deal with and understand that. Start thinking differently, this concept of the global syndemic, malnutrition in all its forms, sustainable diets, policy inertia, those kinds of concepts I think need to get out there. Cities have a lot to offer, as I've said, and I think they're in a different space probably to New Zealand as a whole. But when I think about the contribution, particularly, for example, on the demand side, cities are where people are. What is our demand for the food that we want eaten? And I think we're already seeing a shift towards plant-based diets that can be accelerated within cities, which can have a big effect nationally. And New Zealand and Auckland in particular, I think, are highly well placed to be leaders in this place rather than having changes imposed upon us. Let's carry the leadership with us. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Boyd. It is immensely exciting to see how indeed all of these issues are coming together with some very profound insights from organisations. We're going to, and I'm sorry there isn't time for questions now, we're going to break for lunch. Lunch is back there. Please make your way there, but the food's going to be blessed first, so don't just hold back until that's been done. Have a wonderful lunch. If this last presentation made you nervous about eating, don't worry, it's a vegan lunch. And we will be reconvening here at 1:30 for our afternoon session. Thank you very much indeed.